Hi, I'm Erik Lundgaard.
I'm Danny Monar.
Hey, Danny, we're going to kind of jump into some different things on USP 800 as far as the hazardous communication program. The checklist of all the things to do, it's kind of quite overwhelming, and how a lot of these healthcare facilities are actually going to be required to basically establish a policy that ensures that the procedures are being followed. And so obviously what's better way to do that through a checklist or a hazard communication program. So by all means, this is not fun and it's not, an enjoyable topic, but it has to be addressed, developing standard operating procedures or SOPs to ensure the storage, the transportation of the hazardous drug disposal of that. So, this is kind of like outside of our wheelhouse a little bit, because a lot of times internally, healthcare facility is going to have to kind of do it internally, but we can help audit that.
Yeah, and I know a lot of healthcare facilities, they probably do this already, but a big thing is documenting that and make sure you have this checklist that's being audited internally on a regular basis. And, pretty much making sure that things are being stored properly. That's a big one. Because, let's say you're storing your hazardous drugs that you don't know are there. Spill happens and it turns into a lot bigger of a problem.
Yeah, and hazard communication can be, I'm using this infographic right here from the USP 800, whether it's cleaning, transporting, storing, compounding, dispensing. I mean, this is like a big all-round robin of infographics that during your documenting the hazard during every type of process is very important. So, proper use of PPE is having a proper equipment and devices, and no spill management, taking through all that, the different personnel, and then SDS.
Yeah, SDS pretty much gives you a lot of information about a certain product or material, and it lists the hazards that are related to that, and how can it affect you. So it's good information to know, if you have a spill and you don't necessarily know how dangerous it is, you go to the SDS and it'll tell you.
Yeah, and SDS stands for Safety Data Sheet, and a lot of people probably already know that. There's another one out there called MSDS, but right now the terminology just got switched over to SDS over the last couple of years. So, even a hospital, you need to know what chemical exposures you're having. You need to know how to read that. You know how to interpret that. And I think that it's very scary for a lot of people. Especially in industry, not knowing, how to comply, how to read SDS sheets, knowing what drugs. There's a long list of hazard drugs that we talked about. What is it? Anti-neoplastic and non-anti-neoplastic drugs, and both in the clinical and non-clinical settings. What do you think, as far as the personal training, what kind of training do you think that should be implemented to make sure that a lot of this hazardous communication is being, done effectively in a facility? Do you think it should be done internally or a hybrid of both?
Hybrid of both is beneficial, and that's why this hazardous communication section is so important. It's having, a strict procedure for everyone to follow. People coming in that are a little greener, they're not going to know the ins and outs of the facility that they work in. So following this checklist is going to keep them safe, and it's going to make them feel a lot more comfortable and not as scared as you were attributing to.
Yeah, and it's a plan. Having a plan is always the best thing. If you don't have a plan, you're kind of just winging it. It's from an airplane not having a plan to go from A to B. And, a lot of times when you got these containers of hazardous drugs, labeling those, tagging them out, marking them, identifying them, there's a methodology for all that. So making sure that, that each entity is following that procedure. And I think that we can definitely audit that process like we've done in the past for other things, and help segregate that.
And we can go through that checklist with them.
Yeah, that'd be fun, huh? So at the end of the day, nobody wants to do checklists. They just want to bug out and have some fun. But when you're at work, you kind of have to follow, the rules of it. Especially now, USP 800 is just kind of breaking into the market and now putting people on edge and kind of unraveling where stressful situations and not sure if they can still comply and make sure they're operating under the parameters of that, especially now that the states are going to be enforcing that.
Yeah, and it's really just making sure that healthcare facilities are doing what they should have been doing all along. They're just enforcing it now.
Yeah.
Same thing when asbestos came along. Everyone thought that it was fine. found out that, it can cause cancer even, with people that are working with it.
Mm-hmm.
So with hazardous drugs, it's the same thing pretty much, it's being regulated to make sure that people are handling it properly.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different protocols for receiving and compounding and personal training. There's another thing is even just transporting that. And if you just drop a vial and it spills on the floor and it cracks, how do you even clean that up? What's the best way to do that? Decontaminating the drug, sweeping it up, making sure that internally somebody actually knows how to do that and mitigate and remediate the problem. I think that's going to be another challenge because, a lot of companies are just not prepared for that. And then they're not, it does specify everything in actually the USP 800 checklist, but there's a lot of questions that are very unanswered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, there's going to be new hazardous drugs coming out, in the future. So there's going to be more obstacles to come.
Yeah. I think what we may have an upper hand is we read that well, just being science-based knowledge and interpreting that. So we take that information, process it, and make it very easy for the end user to receive and kind of integrate that into their own internal processes. So I think that kind of wraps up the hazard communication part today. Personal training, we could kind of go over and over on that, but we don't want to beat a dead horse over here. Okay, Danny, thanks.
Thank you.